Welcome. I think the hour is 11 o'clock, so we can begin. As more people join us, we'll just do this introduction. I want to welcome you to the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus webinar, hosted by the Caucus's Nutrient Management Task Force. Wisconsin Senator Andre Jacques, chair of the task force, will be today's moderator. Senator?
Thank you, Dr. Orr. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus. The great participation in these webinars gives me hope about the future of the Great Lakes, with so many dedicated policymakers committed to the future of our shared region. It is in very good hands. This is the second in a three-part series showcasing the work of the Task Force on Nutrient Management. They will be providing more examples of legislative activity in the region to protect the waters of the Great Lakes from nutrient inflow. And we will again be looking at some of the different programs that are currently active in the region. Though this is not an exhaustive survey of legislation, it will highlight some of the innovative programs these states and provinces have developed. This slide is reminding you of all the ways you can ask a question. We do encourage participation and discussion, because that is how we all learn the best. So please plan on active participation if at all possible. We've reserved 90 minutes today so that we can have a full discussion and questions. And please note that, like all of our meetings, this session is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website, so you can refer back to it later. We will be hearing today from Ohio, New York, and Ontario, looking at the very different approaches they have taken. And now I would like to turn this over to Task Force member, Ohio Senator Teresa Gavarone, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Jacques. H2O Ohio is a comprehensive water quality initiative that's working on Ohio's water issues. It was launched by Governor DeWine in 2019, and today is an example of unprecedented collaboration among landowners, industry, and the government to invest in water quality statewide. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Scudder Mackey, Chief of the Ohio Coastal Management from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Dr. Mackey's PhD is in sedimentology, and he has been actively involved with the Lake Erie since 1992.
Well, thank you, Senator. That was a very nice introduction. I'm glad to be here and present to this group. I am going to do a high-level overview of the Ohio H2O Ohio program, and I'll also be speaking about the Ohio Domestic Action Plan as well. So for today's menu, these are the topics that I'm going to touch on fairly quickly. First, what are the issues? We're going to be focusing on nutrient reduction and harmful algal blooms, particularly in the western basin of Lake Erie. I also want to highlight Ohio's commitment to improve water quality, not only in our tributaries and our inland waters, but also in Lake Erie, and really highlight the work that we're doing with Governor DeWine's H2O Ohio program. I want to describe in a brief way the H2O Ohio program funding and the framework for the program, and talk about some of the activities and where we are for a number of the major state agencies that are actually working together in partnership to implement the H2O Ohio program. And then finally, what I really want to highlight is that the way we're making significant progress in Ohio is collaborative work and partnerships across the board with federal, state, and local agencies, local communities, NGOs, and the academic community, and that we are really thinking outside the box. We're doing a lot of innovative thinking, and we have the strong support of our legislature and our administration to make the funding commitments in order to implement the types of projects that I think will make a difference on the ground. Next slide, please. First, what are the issues? Well, one of our primary objectives is to reduce or eliminate harmful algal blooms in the western basin and in the tributaries and inland waters of Lake Erie. It's a public health and safety issue, and I think many of you remember, I think it was August 2nd in 2014, I happened to be driving up through central Michigan to my cabin in the Upper Peninsula to head for a family vacation, and on the news, I'm listening to how the water supply at the city of Toledo had been basically contaminated with microcystin toxin from a harmful algal bloom. Lasted for 3 days. It made national and actually international news, and I think that was a wake-up call for everybody that these harmful algal blooms and the nutrient loading that we have coming into Lake Erie has a significant impact. It's a major issue. Obviously, this has an impact on the North Coast economy, tourism, ecotourism, fishing, bird watching, all of those things that people like to do along our North Coast is a huge economic engine and driver for the state of Ohio. So obviously the harmful algal blooms have an impact there. Another issue that used to be important, and it still is that these nutrients also contribute to increased productivity in Lake Erie, and actually as it causes anoxia, or a lack of oxygen in the bottom waters of the central basin of Lake Erie, and that has a major impact on the distribution of fish. And sometimes during certain types of wind events, it actually affects drinking water supplies as well. So the state of Ohio, there's been a number of task forces, and the state of Ohio has actually made a legal binding commitment to implement a 40% reduction in phosphorus loads into the western basin of Lake Erie by 2025. Also included in that agreement is a 25% reduction in sediment loads by 2025. So the H2 Ohio program, the domestic action plan, and other actions taken in partnership by state and federal agencies, we are trying to achieve these goals as quickly as possible. So as Senator Gabarone mentioned, in 2019, Governor DeWine proposed, and with the strong support of the Ohio legislature, implemented and funded the H2 Ohio program. Next slide, please. So since I work for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, I'm going to start with that agency first. And what I'm going to do is give you a quick summary of the type of work that we're doing. So H2 Ohio by the numbers. Currently, where we stand, what the Department of Natural Resources is doing is investing in natural infrastructure, primarily wetlands, both along the Lake Erie coastline, but also up in our watersheds, particularly in Northwest Ohio. Today, we have projects on the books to either create, restore, or enhance 57 wetlands. We're actually moving towards 60. There's several that are in process right now. That rate represents an investment of $64.5 million through the H2 Ohio program. The other thing that's really important to note is that these wetlands will filter more than 100,000 acres of landscape in terms of filtering out nutrients and trapping sediments. Actually, 7,000 acres will also be created by these wetlands, and that is a huge number for those of you who are working on trying to increase wetland acreage in the basin. We have more than 25 nonprofit NGO entities working with us, along with multiple federal, state, and local agencies, communities, and port authorities. The other thing is that $4.3 million has been allocated out of the H2 Ohio Fund to actually establish a long-term monitoring program of the projects that we invest in to guarantee that they work. This monitoring program is for a 10-year period. And this is really important to ensure that this natural infrastructure that we invest in is maintained and operated properly for the long term, because this is a long-term water quality commitment. And finally, for those of you who like critters, the wetlands provide habitat for more than 90 endangered and threatened species, which are really important to the Great Lakes Basin. Next slide, please. This is a map that shows where we have actually made these investments, and this map is actually out of date. It shows 47 projects. We actually have 10 more. They haven't had a chance to get on the map. What you can see is this is a statewide program. The blue dots are projects, wetland projects that are located along the Lake Erie coastline, and the red dots are projects that are located up in the watershed. The yellow line shows the general, the Northwest Lake Erie watershed area that feeds the western basin of Lake Erie. And you can see a number of projects. I believe we have 12 projects that are located south of the Lake Erie watershed. What I'd like to do on the right here is talk about the different types of projects we're investing in, or wetlands. We are investing in floodplain and riparian wetlands, in natural areas and other areas in the watershed itself, on the landscape. We're also investing in coastal wetlands, in water and flow through wetlands at the mouth of the Maumee River, in Sandusky Bay, and along the Ohio Lake Erie shoreline. And the last type of project that we're investing in are the diked wetlands that we have along the northwest shore, the Bowling Marsh Reconnection Project. And you can see it's located up along the coast there near Sandusky Bay. This is just an example. These wetlands are separated hydrologically from the lake and the watershed. They are managed primarily for waterfowl production. And what we are doing is reconnecting those wetlands to Lake Erie and also to the adjacent watersheds. So during certain seasons, we can open up those wetlands, allow water to flow through them, process the nutrients, trap the sediments, and then when it flows into Lake Erie, it's much cleaner. So those are really the three types of wetlands that we're currently investing in. The other type of work that we're doing, this is an example of a nature-based shoreline, and this is on the south shore of Sandusky Bay. This is a project where we're creating a barrier system just offshore, creating wetlands behind. And this is what I want to highlight is the synergies here, where we're going to be restoring the Pickerel Creek floodplain area. So there will be water quality and nutrient reduction benefits there. But as the creek flows out, it will be trapped behind this barrier system and the wetlands that are created there, and will move laterally along the shoreline, so it significantly improves water quality. The second benefit to this type of project is this is a high energy environment. There's a lot of erosion along this coastline. So this barrier system is also going to significantly reduce the coastal erosion that occurs. It's going to create habitat. And so this is an example of how we have two separate projects that are designed to work together. And we're looking for those types of opportunities across the landscape, not only along the coast, but also up in the watershed to maximize the water quality benefits. Next slide, please. For the Department of Agriculture, this is sort of a summary of the work that they're doing. They are focused on working with the agricultural community on the landscape. And the examples of the type of work and where we are right now in terms of the number of acres under different types of conservation or best management practices is listed on the right side of the screen. Nearly 1.1 million acres are in voluntary nutrient management programs. More than 500,000 acres are under variable rate treatment. And what that is where you have GPS systems and you have maps of the fields, and you're actually applying fertilizer or the appropriate chemicals, manure, in ways that you're not exceeding what's really needed by the soil. 300,000 acres are under where they're doing direct injection and placement of fertilizer into the subsurface, so we don't have runoff from surface waters. 170,000 acres where manure is actually being incorporated into the soils and reused as a soil amendment. 155,000 acres in crop rotation, and more than 450,000 acres in cover crops, which really helps reduce the amount of nutrient runoff and also retain soil during the winter months. The point is that more than 50% of the area within the Maumee River watershed is now under some sort of management practice to help reduce nutrients, which is a significant accomplishment. In terms of funding, the funding for the Department of Agriculture, they had about $20 million from Senate Bill 299 and an additional $30 million that came through their initial H2 Ohio. So we're looking at a $50 million investment here made to actually work cooperatively and provide funds to landowners and the agricultural community to implement these conservation practices. It's a really neat program, and I believe in this next budget cycle, which I think Senator Gavarone is currently sort of negotiating on, we will see additional substantial investments made through the Ohio Department of Agriculture, which will be really good. Next slide, please. Well, also what I would like to highlight in the future, most of the focus has been in the area on green on the map shown on this slide. That is predominantly the Maumee River watershed within Ohio. And what we're looking to in this next cycle through the Department of Agriculture is to expand these types of practices into several other watersheds further to the east to actually cover the entire watershed area that drains into the western basin of Lake Erie. That would be the Sandusky River watershed and the Portage River watershed and the Huron River watershed as well. And you can see the comments on the left, they're looking to actually expand the range of these types of programs across the entire area. Next slide, please. Going to Ohio EPA. Ohio EPA has statutory authority for water quality in the state of Ohio. Primarily drinking water. They manage a lot of the drinking water plants. They also manage the wastewater plants. Primarily deal with the point source pollutants. The state has made several billion-dollar investment over the last decade or so improving our point sources. So those discharges are relatively minimal within Northwest Ohio. And this is an example through H2 Ohio where Ohio EPA is actually focusing on the home septic treatment systems, where many of them are failing, and they actually contribute 5 to 8% of the nutrient load into the Maumee River watershed. So what they have done is partnered with 7 local county health departments providing funding to actually go to assess and repair and or replace failing septic systems to help address this source of nutrient load on the landscape. And it's in addition to that, in terms of the initial investment made, there is a $10 million state revolving fund available for these home septic treatment systems. It is a statewide program, but what we are trying to do is get the health departments engaged, establish a process and a mechanism and a program that then can take advantage of the revolving funds to actually really grow this program so it's much more effective at managing this, this nutrient source. Next slide, please. The other thing I'd like to talk about that Ohio EPA is working on, and this is tied to the Ohio Domestic Action Plan, is the 9-element non-point source. These are strategic implementation plans. And the map on the left shows the distribution of the current 9-element plans that are underway. We are looking at a substantial expansion. Another 14 to 15 of these plans are going to be on the books this next cycle. And these are locally developed plans at what they call the Huck 12 watershed level. These are smaller watersheds. You get an idea of their size. If you look at the map, you see the small gray lines. Each of those is a Huck 12 watershed, so they're fairly small scale. And these are plans developed by the local soil and water conservation districts to design a suite of projects, a portfolio of projects, best management practices, potentially wetlands, that work together to achieve a certain target load at the pour point of those watersheds. In other words, what they're trying to do is design a plan that will address the nutrient loads in that specific watershed, given the characteristics of that watershed. And it's designed to meet a very specific target load, which is then summed up through what we call a distributed load model. So we can actually understand how all of these different projects sum up to actually reduce the load down where we actually measure the phosphorus reduction at the Waterville gauge, let's say at the Maumee River. The other thing about the 9-element plans are that the projects within those plans are eligible for funding from GLRI and also the US EPA 319 funds. So federal funding is really dependent on having these projects as part of a 9-element watershed plan. So this is something that is very important to the state, and we will be expanding this program in the future. Next slide, please. One other thing I would like to highlight is that I've been focused more on the H2 Ohio investments, but believe me, we are looking to leverage the H2 Ohio investments that we make with other funding sources, particularly federal funding through US EPA, through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, We're also, I know that funding is coming through the National Conservation and through NRCS. Federal program. Senator Brown last week just announced a $16 million award, $8 million coming to the Ohio Department of Agriculture to assist with the H2 Ohio implementation of programs that promote soil health and nutrient management. So we're really looking at our federal partners. We're also looking at some of the various infrastructure bills. This is an example of some of the GLRI projects through the Domestic Action Plan 2.0 implementation. Part of this is run through Ohio EPA. It's a smaller grant, $774,000, but this gives you an idea of the types of projects that we are going to be investing in with the federal dollars. And we really want to try to expand the federal funds coming in. We want to leverage our H2 Ohio dollars as much as possible. Next slide, please. Last thing I want to talk about is the need for long-term monitoring on these projects. For many of the work, much of the work that's been done in the past, particularly some of the federal projects, but also some of the state projects, basically we award a grant, we are active during the grant award period, and then basically we step away. And for many of these projects, we need to think about these are investments in natural infrastructure over the long term, because we've made a long-term commitment to water quality in Ohio. And so we need to monitor these programs. So as I mentioned earlier, the H2 Ohio program, we have made a 10-year commitment to monitor these H2 Ohio projects. And the way we're doing that, $4.3 million has been set aside. What we're going to do is invest in what they call the LEARN Network. It's the Lake Erie Area Research Network. It's a consortium of universities in Ohio. I believe there are about 12 universities, plus the Old Woman Creek National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is actually part of my coastal program. And the LEARN Network is led by Ohio State University. So what the state has done is basically selecting a third-party independent entity, the LEARN Network, this consortium of universities who has the research and the technical skills and actually the students available to set up a comprehensive integrated monitoring program of all of our H2 Ohio projects. So we can actually document success, we can assess project performance, and by doing this monitoring, we can also maintain these projects at a level where they continue to provide the water quality benefits over the long term that we require. And the last thing that we're doing, this is a little bit of the out of the box thinking, we are now testing low cost innovative water quality sensors. It's called smart sensor technologies at Old Woman Creek, where these low cost sensors, they have been set up with the high cost sensors that we usually use for water quality. We're doing comparison studies now, but the whole idea is that these sensors are connected by a LoRaWAN gateway Wi-Fi network, which is a regional Wi-Fi network where you don't have to have the hardwired infrastructure. And via telemetry, all of the data is collected real time and transmitted to a server. So we have real-time monitoring of different water quality parameters, water level parameters, and also weather parameters for all of our H2 Ohio projects. And these sensors are small and they're low cost, which is going to result in a substantial cost savings over the long term. And we're also going to get much higher quality data across a broader area. So this is an example of some of the investments they're making. So last slide. Basically what we're doing is we're implementing Governor DeWine's vision to improve water quality and protect public health and safety in Ohio across the entire state. Really, I can't express my gratitude to the Ohio legislature for its strong support and the innovative funding mechanisms that they've been able to implement to support that vision. This is something that's going to benefit everybody in the state of Ohio. And I think we're making significant progress. We're making investments in natural infrastructure, that's ODNR, sustainable agriculture, the Department of Agriculture. And we're also doing the water quality monitoring work and assessment work to make sure that these projects are effective and are accomplishing our goals and objectives. And we are partnering with local communities in terms of getting this done. So the last thing I want to highlight is the strong interagency partnerships. You know, a while ago, all of our state agencies, they were sort of like independent silos. And what I have seen via the H2 Ohio program, we have a core group of folks in these three agencies and also the Ohio Lake Erie Commission that interact on a daily basis. We are true partners, and it's this partnership between the federal agencies, the state agencies, the local governments, the communities, the NGOs, the landowners, and academia that really make this program a success. And we are also doing this by leveraging the expertise and the funds that are available from multiple different sources with the objective to achieve our goals, reduce nutrient loads into our water bodies, and eliminate harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie. So thank you very much for listening to the presentation, and more than willing to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mackey. This is a massive investment by your state, and we will take a few questions now, and there will be another opportunity again after all the presentations are finished. I know that we have one question that came in from Ontario MPP Barrett regarding beyond monitoring the Ohio projects, how we'll evaluate and measure the benefits. We're going to take that in terms of the broader discussion at the end, but that's an excellent opportunity to just remind folks about our next webinar, which I will do again at the end of the presentation, but Blue Accounting through the Great Lakes Commission, and how we're going to have some of the dashboards and the state monitoring efforts and how they can interface into a region-wide Great Lakes accounting of all of our efforts to address whether it's nutrient management or any number of other issues related to water quality. So we did have an additional question that came in regarding the detail about the Maumee watershed. I believe a statistic of 50% of the watershed is now, and I must have missed the rest of the statement there. If you,
yeah, well, we can let Ken Smith go ahead and ask that question. Ken, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. I mean, but that's essentially what the question was. You know, appreciate the presentation from an Ohioan who knows H2O Ohio really well. But yeah, so you made the statement of 50% of the watershed is now.
It's under some sort of either a best management practice, or a conservation, some sort of conservation action. When you look at when you add up the acreage numbers there, it comes up to about 50% of the total acreage in Ohio of the Maumee River watershed is under some sort of a conservation or best management practice. It's been touched by H2 Ohio in some way, shape, or form.
So can I ask a follow-up of, is that the easy 50%? Is that the low hanging?
If I can't raise my hand, I can't.
Representative Sheehy, we can hear you.
Okay.
We'll get to you right after
Thank you for that
question.
Okay.
Senator Sheehy, or Representative Sheehy, always trying to steal my thunder. So is that the 50%? Is that low hanging fruit, or I mean, do we anticipate is the other 50%? Is that going to be? Is it unnecessary per se, or is it scheduled? I mean, can you help illuminate the other half? Thank you, sir. I'm going to go back on mute.
The Ohio Department of Agriculture, when they initially implemented some of their programs, they put out like a request for interest, I guess is what you would call it. And it turns out that they, as I said, they had about $50 million available for some of the programs that they were putting out there. And they got a response that totaled over $100 million in requests. And they could only honor 50% of those requests. So what I'm saying is that I think, yes, much of this is low-hanging fruit, but I think that there's more low-hanging fruit left. And I think I know where you're going, is that as more and more of the watershed becomes under some sort of either nutrient management or best management practice or conservation management, that it's going to become more and more difficult. And I think that the other question that you may be going to, and I don't specifically have the answer to that, is what percentage of the watershed do we need to get to in order to achieve our nutrient reduction goals? And that's something that we're still in the process of doing the modeling work and doing the assessment work to go. Because remember, this is also combined with work that's being done by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources in terms of the wetlands program, and then also some of the additional work that's being done by Ohio EPA in managing other water quality and nutrient sources. So I understand your question, and unfortunately I can't give you that answer, but it's something we are working toward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mackey. Next, we'll go to Representative Sheehy and then MPP French.
Thank you very much, Senator Jacques, and thank you, Dr. McKay, for this very good presentation. Of course, my concerns continue to be the excess nutrient level that are continue to flow down in the western basin of Lake Erie.
Yes.
And just this week, there's a group of concerned citizens who have voiced their reservations and concerns about the additional animal feeding operations that are in the pipeline, that have been recently suggested in the pipeline, which will obviously increase the number of animal feeding operations and therefore the excessive amount of nutrient load that will be coming down the western basin of Lake Erie. And we really have not moved the needle with respect to our aspirational goals of the reduction that we've aspired to for the 2025 goals that we said that we're going to try to meet. And so, what is the solution? Can we at least establish some sort of a moratorium on any additional animal feeding operations that come on? Let's admit that the only thing that this is going to do is even more saturate some of the acreage in the western basin of Lake Erie, and the direct result is just the ramping up of more and more nutrient loads as they come down river. Now, admittedly, the efforts that we have made, that you have made, the state has made with respect to the wetlands, and almost restoring some of those areas to the way they were 200 years ago, before the German immigrants came and very effectively turned that land into some of the richest soil in the state of Ohio for farming. And we all admire that. We all admire that industry, and we all, like I tell people, I have cheese, yogurt, and cottage cheese in the refrigerator, and we eat a lot of chicken and beef around here. And so we want all those operations to be successful. But what is the solution? I mean, would you suggest that we continue to have more animal feeding operations in the western basin of Lake Erie okayed until such time that we can meet those aspirational goals, or find some way to deal more effectively with the excessive nutrient load? And after you're not, I won't be angry. I'm not angry, but I have another meeting to get to. So, Doctor, thank you all. Jacques, thank you for your continued work on this. And I'll listen to an answer. And then if I jump off, it's not because I'm angry about the answer. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll go to mute.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I really don't want to make you angry, believe me. So, first of all, that's really within the purview of the Ohio Department of Agriculture. They have that regulatory authority. I do know that we are having internal discussions about manure based on the assessment work. The manure contribution is is not nearly as significant as the more of the chemical fertilizer. And I think you're aware of that. It is something that I think that we may be able to do more with, and there are internal discussions on that topic. I don't have a specific answer for you at this time. We are looking at ways to implement, if you have an animal feeding, like a CAFO basically is what you're talking about, ways to manage that material in a more appropriate way. And keeping it on site, recycling it, and these are the types of efforts I think that we'll be moving forward with. But again, I would really defer you to the Ohio Department of Agriculture, because for us at ODNR, that is not an area that I have expertise in.
All right, thank you, Representative Sheehy, Dr. Mackey. I think next we will go to MPP Jennifer French, if she still had a question.
Thank you for the presentation. Fun fact, don't worry about making Representative Sheehy mad. It's kind of fun sometimes.
Okay.
But I appreciate the presentation. I had a few specific questions. First, I want to say that in the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, I've actually taken the opportunity to raise the H2 Ohio goals when it comes to wetlands and whatnot. I've been very impressed with that part of it, and we've had some lively debate in our legislature. So it's been actually quite interesting to learn about the project and hold it up as an example. I hope though that as the project is unfolding and you've got all of that excellent data and I'm sure marked improvement in water quality and whatnot, I hope other jurisdictions will look at that data and I'm sure it'll be public. But if there's something to share with us, we as a task force would be glad to have it and kind of share with our respective jurisdictions. You showed in one of your slides sensors, and I don't mean to get into the weeds on the sensors, but I'm fascinated. First of all, I'd like to know what they're measuring and where. Specifically, I know that I live along Lake Ontario. I look out my window and I can see the lake. And we see that along the shoreline, the temperatures are always and consistently, elevated because of the industry along there and the constant output of superheated water, clean or what have you, but superheated. So obviously perfect conditions or better conditions for blooms to grow for longer periods throughout the year. Yes. So I'm curious what you're measuring. Is it sort of effluent and rivers? Is it the lakes? Is it all places? And is it, the particulate or not particulate? Is it the nutrient levels and or temperature? I'm a nerd and I'm interested. Thank you.
Okay, I'll give you a nerdy answer and just say yes to all of that, if that's what you want. And I don't know if you want to go back to the last slide, not that it's all that critical, but the innovators, you can measure just about anything with these small innovative sensors. There we go. Let me slide. I have something actually in the way right here on mine. It's the chat. And I'm just showing you some examples here. On the lower right, you can see it says water level. This is a microwave water level sensor. This is on a bridge. Where we do these, basically what you would do in these wetlands is you monitor water quality and the parameters coming into the wetland. And then ideally you would monitor them on the outlet, depending on how water is moving through the wetland. So you're looking for changes. And in this case, this is actually an in situ nutrient. It measures certain water quality characteristics. It would be like, conductivity, turbidity and things of this sort. And then the sensor on the upper right, I'm sorry, that was the one on the left center. The one on the upper right is where it's actually periodically, like every hour or at whatever time step you want, it actually is sucking water out and then actually running it through a chemical analysis, and you're getting a detailed breakdown of nutrients that are then analyzed and then stored. Okay, so we actually have installed these things adjacent to the larger, more expensive equipment, because where Old Woman Creek is, it is 70% funded by NOAA, okay, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have very strict standards for water quality and the types of scientific monitoring. So what we're trying to do is assess the reliability and the accuracy of these low-cost sensors to see how it compares to these high-resolution sensors. The point is that because these are so much less expensive, they're easier to install and you can install more of them. So instead of just at the inlet and the outlet of the wetland, we can now install these sensors geographically within the wetland itself to understand what's happening internally within the wetland. This works for rivers. We have installed these types of sensors with this Wi-Fi network underneath the Edison Bridge that crosses Sandusky Bay. And we also put in current meters where there's actually flow reversals that occur every 14 hours due to what they call the SESH event, the wind-driven events on Lake Erie, okay? And on the left side, the two images that you see on the left side on this slide, down at the bottom, there is a complete weather sensing package. So you get the the moisture, humidity, you get the temperature data, all of the associated weather data. You know whether or not the sun is shining, so you know how much solar radiation is coming down. Because believe it or not, the ambient conditions actually affect the accuracy of the sensors that we have, so we can apply correction factors. There's also actually the soil moisture meters we're testing where you can actually stick a probe in there and it gives you soil moisture down to 15 to 20 centimeters deep in the soil. So there's a lot of different sensors. And then the image on the upper left here is that low RAN wide gateway system, which provides a very robust, broad regional Wi-Fi network where we connect all these systems together via Wi-Fi, so we can actually downlist into a server and integrate all this data simultaneously.
And then that data will make it into somehow political speak or somehow into that, like what the recommendation.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a little interpretation there, okay? And basically that is in part the responsibility of the LEARN network, this consortium of universities, researchers in various areas of expertise. They'll combine grant funding, they'll bring students in to do the research, to analyze the data that's collected. There's going to be a lot of learning. There's a lot we don't know about wetlands. There's a lot we don't know about some of these best management practices. And if we can understand these systems better, do the research, and plus also train up a whole new cadre of students that can then, come work for us to help actually improve water quality even better, I think it's a win-win for everyone. And the thing is, that's critical here, and this is something I might want to point out since I have some legislators here to talk to, is that one of the issues at least in state government, and I think this is in government in general, is that this requires a long-term commitment of funding. And right now we're limited to biennium timescales, every 2 years or so. So it's very difficult to say, oh, we can commit to this program for the next decade or multiple decades in the future. And this is something that we really need to find a way to get around, to find those long-term funding streams. The amounts of dollars needed here are not significant on an annual basis, but they need to be there to support this type of work well into the future. So if you folks can figure out a way legislatively to get that done, I can tell you there will be a lot of happy campers here in Ohio, particularly in our agencies. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mackey, and thank you to all of our participants. Some very thoughtful questions. We're going to have to move on to our next speaker at this point, but Dr. Mackey, you'll be staying with us to answer some additional questions at the end, right? Fantastic. So now moving to the east, I see that New York Assemblymember Billy Jones is with us, and I will thank you for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you to introduce our next speaker.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm going to leave my camera off for a minute. My Wi-Fi or my internet service isn't great right now, but it's a pleasure to be with all of you here this morning. And I have the pleasure of introducing Chastity Miller. who is the district manager of the Franklin County Soil and Water Conservation District in the North Country here in New York. She's the past president of the New York State Conservation Districts Employee Association and current treasurer. Chastity has over 22 years of experience with environmental conservation and restoration, with a master's degree in environmental conservation and certification in geographic information systems, GIS. She has expertise in the implementation of best management practices for point and non-point source pollution, restoration, planning, education, and outreach. She has been with the Soil and Water District for over 12 years and 10 years as a private consultant. I have had the pleasure of working with Chastity on the county level when I was at Franklin County legislature, and now at the state level as well. And she's always been great to work with, just an abundance of information. I always go to her with these questions, and I have the pleasure of introducing her today. So take it away, Chas.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the introduction, and it's definitely a pleasure to be able to work with Assemblyman Jones for sure, for many years. I won't admit how many. So I'm going to highlight some of what we do in New York, and I wanted to kind of start at a higher level. In New York State, we have something called the Environmental Protection Fund. This was established in 1993 through real estate tax transfers. At that time, it was recognized that there was a lot of sales going on in New York that involved the Adirondack Mountains and forest land. And it was recognized that New York State needed to do something to help to protect and keep our conservation lands together. And so it was established in 1993. It was $31 million at that time. It is now up to $300 million. And over those years, which is 25 years, it's $3.4 billion that has been implemented in New York State. And that's one thing that's unique about New York State. The goal of these were to do large capital projects that involved solid waste, parks, recreation, historic preservation, open space, climate change, and mitigation, along with adaptation. So it was protecting our environmental lands. What it also did is support many of the state agencies that are in New York, like New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the Office of Parks and Recreation and Historical Preservation, Empire State Development Corporation, Department of Ag and Markets, and the Department of State. The one other thing that's really unique with this funding opportunity, which does directly work in nutrient reduction, is the partnerships. And many of these things have already been talked about. So our partnerships with USDA, Soil and Water Conservation Districts, DEC, US Fish and Wildlife, a Soil and Water Committee. There's 58 soil and water districts in New York State. So I know many states are different in how soil and water districts are set up. But that's, kind of the base of this. And this was the other advantage to this, is that this has provided a legacy of projects. So every year we apply for things I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, and there's always more projects than we have funding for. I'm sure everybody has that in each state, but there's always a set of projects that can get implemented and completed. So, as we talked about a little bit already with Scudder, is a lot of this is based on best management practices. And what these are projects and things that you can do to protect the land. So we're prescribing pollution prevention, we're controlling prevention and pollution and nutrients going into a system. And this is things that can prevent or restore water quality. It's really important to identify which best management practice will work. So everything requires planning also. No good project goes off well without a good plan. So New York State has guidance for best management practices, and these are a majority of them, but definitely not all of them. There are manuals and guides that many people have been working on for many years and continue to update and change as things, more technologies come in, but we're construction, agricultural projects, restorations, local roads and rural roads is really big right now. There's a great plan and program in Pennsylvania and Vermont, and New York State is starting to try and get their local rural roads put into a program statewide. Forestry is something that we're new and upcoming, and we're trying to implement more on. Stream banks, flooding, spills, leaks, stormwater. I mean, again, we can go on forever on how many things we have out there that we have best management practices for and we can implement. So as part of that environmental protection fund, there are many different grant opportunities. And these are the things that we apply for in New York State to implement best management practices, which are improving water quality, which are reducing nutrient loads. And it all starts with our non-agricultural, non-point source pollution. This is a grant opportunity that municipalities and soil and water districts can apply for directly. It's usually a 75-25 cost share. There's a statewide ranking. So you rank from the North Country to Buffalo to New York City. So it's pretty large, and there's a lot of funding. This is $70 million. There's projects from wastewater treatments, salt and sand storages, land acquisitions for source water, so protecting those drinking water land bases so that we are reducing the nutrients, aquatic connectivity, and something we call our MS4 program, which is our municipal stormwater system for larger towns and villages. So there's a threshold of population for those. We don't have any in the North Country yet, but at some point we will. I'm from a part of New York State that's very rural, so it's hard to believe sometimes when you look at New York. But so then on its counter side, there's the agricultural non-point source abatement program. Soil and water districts are the only ones who can apply for these. And this is based on planning that happens with technical professionals and soil and water districts to implement those agricultural projects. And we had a question earlier about feeding operations, and this includes those feeding operations along with smaller farms that don't meet those feeding operations requirements. In New York State, we have a program called CAFO, Confined Animal Feeding Operations, and any farm that has over 300 cows or animal units is required to be a CAFO and be registered with a permit and monitored by our New York State DEC program. They are required to go through a significant amount of planning, and if they do not have everything that they need to have as best management practices on their facilities, they get fined for it and need to complete it. So New York has a very, I want to say, somewhat aggressive program to help protect and help those farmers, but they also provide the funding to do those projects. So this is where this ag non-point source comes in. Again, statewide ranking, cost share 75-25 at a minimum. We are on round 27 of these. They come out yearly. So we're in about yearly, I should say. COVID's kind of slowed things down a little bit, so we're a little behind right now, but this is over 27 years worth of programs and planning and putting this in place. So right now, from round 16 to 26 is when we have our best data. There's over 1,817 best management practices installed in New York State, over 1.1, the whole projects are over $73 billion worth of projects implemented. So these projects have state funding and local funding. You get that local connection and you get that local commitment to improving water quality and protecting our resources. So this all comes in as part of our agricultural environmental management program. And this is specific to soil and water districts, or what we like to call AEM or AIM. It depends on who you talk to in the state. This program isn't simple, but it gets down to the nitty gritty of what we're doing. This is the planning, well, it used to, at least until this past year, be the planning portion of getting farms and operations the funding that they needed and technical assistance to figure out where their fencing needs to go, where the manure storage needs to go, what practices they need to put in to protect the clean water from dirty water. And we do this with a comprehensive nutrient management plan and planners that write those in New York State. This is, again, from people with, it can be help people with 20 chickens or 2,000 cows. You know, it goes across the range, and they're always looking for new opportunities and new ways to utilize, protect, and implement projects that really do help out. State aid for districts is something that's also written into the EPF, or the Environmental Protection Fund. So this is funding that goes to soil and water districts to help support what we do. In New York State, soil and water districts are specific, and they can work on private lands, and they're not regulatory. So our goal is to really help out before something gets ourselves into a trouble, or to help somebody fix something when we're there. There's 3 portions of funding in this chunk. There's a Part A, B, and C. Part A is for us to do our technical work, for those technical people to get half back, up to $60,000. Part B is $6,000 to do a specialized project across New York State. And those can range from forestry management plans to tile drainage to helping a school out with a water quality project, green infrastructure, putting in a rain garden, that kind of information. And Part C is the funding that we get for our board of directors and us specifically to do those projects. Now, years ago when I started, we would get about $8,000 in this. Because of the EPF increases, we're up to about $100,000 in this chunk. And this helps us get smaller projects done, help municipalities, help landowners. What our goal is to help people do better things. Another project and another program that's new to New York is New York State Grown and Certified. This used to be Pride of New York. And the reason this came about is Commissioner Ball was at the grocery store one day, and he was looking at eggs in the grocery section. And he was trying to figure out what everything meant on a carton of eggs. And so he called up somebody at Ag and Markets and said, okay, what has to be on a carton of eggs in order for it to be sold in New York State grocery stores? Basically, it needs to say eggs, and it needs to say what size they are. So everything else that's on a carton of eggs is not required, which is very interesting. And so he wanted to make an opportunity to make a cohesive way of labeling products, making sure they're environmentally sound, and making sure that those facilities where they're coming from are creating the highest quality food and protecting the environment at their highest ability. And so New York State Grown and Certified started a few years ago with eggs and maple. Now it's beef, sheep, dairy, Stewart's grocery stores. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with those. They have facilitated and contracted with a certain amount of producers to create their own, the New York State Grown and Certified milk and yogurt and ice cream, which we all of course love, and we're getting into ice cream season. I don't know about you guys, but it's always ice cream season at my house. So climate resiliency farming is another program. New York State Soil and Water is very simple, similar to Ag Non-Point Source, but I'm highlighting this because currently we are at round 4, about to apply for round 5. 104 projects have been implemented in this round, which is over $4 billion worth of funding. And again, that's the state share and the local share. So farmers putting money into these projects to get them done. And these are mostly for manure storage covers and flares, so reducing methane gases, water management projects, so again, getting the nutrients and protecting the waters going into our state waters, and healthy soils. And I wanted to highlight this one because there is a lot of new talk, not new, but more chatter about climate and resiliency and mitigation and adaptions and making things better overall atmospheric wise. And so that's why I wanted to highlight this one. One more is the implementation of high efficiency irrigation water systems. Now you might say, okay, why are we talking about irrigation when it comes to nutrient management? Well, water savings is important. We're lucky in New York to have a lot of water. There are some states that have to go on water restrictions because there isn't enough water to feed the people. And so we're lucky in the sense that we've got this, but what we want to do is protect that. You know, it's easier to fix something before it gets bad than it is to fix it after there's a problem. Saves a lot of money and it's really important. And so these are high efficiency systems that trickle or drip low flow emitters, and they help keep the moisture in the soil. So we're doing multiple things. We're reducing nutrients, we're reducing the use of pesticides, we're reducing runoff, and we're eliminating groundwater contamination. So we're utilizing what we need. And in areas and times when we have droughts, then we have the water resources there. Source water buffer program. So again, this is something that we're getting better points for on applications. Putting a buffer in around a forest or around an agricultural operation or around a municipal building where there's a lot of pavement to collect the water and treat it before it ends up in those waterways. And that's something that, you know, we talked a little bit about already. So these are forested buffers, or we're talking about just vegetated buffers, carbon sinks. So this is where those can go and get protected. So we're requesting and asking people to leave 100 to 300 feet along the edge of a stream and let it grow wild and let it go natural, or even plant trees and monitor them so that we can protect those water resources for future. And again, 75-25 cost share programs. They're even putting them into easements so that producers are able to get rental payments every year on them. So it's something that's benefiting them. People are more apt to do something if there's a benefit there. So additional programs, New York State Ag District. So New York State has a agricultural district program. This is connected to farmland protection and keeping those areas that are best for farming in farming, and the areas that are not in other opportunities, you know, say wetlands or whatnot. New York State DEC has a significant number of programs that come out watershed wise, watershed associations. One of the most interesting things in New York State is, again, our partnerships. It starts at the top, but we're all in it together. When I was introduced, I was president of our Employees Association. So what that does is it actually allows me the opportunity to sit on committees where we're making decisions about what we're doing in New York State all together. So I've sat in meetings where I'm part of the Soil and Water District, the Department of Health is there, the Department of Ag and Markets is there, New York State DEC is there, the NRCS, USDA, and Farm Service agencies are there. And so we're all making these decisions together. We're all talking about what is there and what's the best for everyone to represent and figure out what's the best use of funding, money, and partnerships. So just to take a step back and kind of go back to where I was, EPF, so we're lucky in New York State to have a large fund that does fund our conservation programs and environmental protection. This support is essential in New York State, and we're very lucky to have it for sure. There's a legacy of projects. Every year we apply for these funding opportunities. I have clean water where I am in New York State. It's hard for me to get these applications. I put 5 to 6 applications in every year and I might get one. but that's because my water's clean and there's places that need it faster than I do. But we work really hard to make sure we can get those. But we continue to develop those grants so that we're getting the funding out more. We have these partnerships. Again, I can't say that enough, and the local commitment. So it's not just us. It's not just the funding from the state. It's our landowners saying, hey, you know what? I want to do something to prevent the environment from degrading. I want to keep nutrients out. I actually want to keep it on my farm because I can use it that way. What can I do to help? And then, you know, and then having that opportunity to talk to somebody without feeling like they're doing something in trouble and getting the technical support that they need to do it. It's not so overwhelming. So in New York State, these are the people that we want to talk about. These are the people who are the best to, you know, say, hey, what are we doing? How are we doing it? So Brian Steinmuller, he's the Assistant Director of Ag and Markets. Greg Albrecht, he is our AEM coordinator for the state. He will be humble about it, but he's amazing. He is your go-to guy in New York State for anything agriculture. He, again, will be very humble about it, but he's very, very good. Dustin Lewis is currently the president of the Employees Association. He's in Saratoga County Soil and Water, and then my contact information. So I'm going to stop share so you're back at your slides. And I'll let Carolyn, you take it back over, I think.
All right. Actually, I'll just jump in, but thank you, Chastity. We really appreciate you bringing up just a very thorough presentation, and we can.
Thank you.
It looks like we're going to be holding off until after the final presentation. So at this point, and you'll be sticking around, Ms. Miller, so I appreciate that. We're going to turn across the border to look at a program in Ontario, and we have two speakers to look at their programs from two different sides. So our first speaker from Ontario is MPP Toby Barrett. Mr. Barrett holds a partner in Farmley Farms, and he will be followed by MPP John Vanhoff, a former dairy farmer, and in fact his writing is very similar to my district with a very strong dairy influence. MPP Vanhoff is the agriculture and food critic for Ontario. And we will take it away, MPP Barrett.
Well, good morning, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Andre, Senator Jacques. And I think it was about this time 2 years ago, I met an awful lot of your Wisconsin steelheaders, the rainbow fishermen, although we were up on Lake Superior in Minnesota. So I guess they pretty well covered all the streams in Wisconsin and moved north. Yeah, a big thank you to the Great Lakes Caucus, and a thank you to this Nutrient Management Task Force to present an opportunity just to tell you a little bit about a program in Ontario, and just given some time constraints I think are looming now, I just want to focus on one project, the province of Ontario. We certainly, over the years, there's a plethora of legislation and programs through not only our Ministry of Agriculture, but also through Ministry of the Environment and through Ministry of Natural Resources. Through agriculture, we brought in really quite comprehensive nutrient management legislation about 21 years ago, and that has served us well with some of the more recent pressures on our lakes. So my focus today, of course, on phosphorus and algae blooms and what have you, and the focus is on Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair. This isn't a conflict of interest, but my farm is on Lake Erie. My riding starts about 20 miles north of Erie, Pennsylvania. I have a riding that's half my riding's underwater, half the riding is under Lake Erie. And two of my sisters married commercial fishermen that are out there on the lake, and they get to take a look at that New York State shore and the Pennsylvania shore when they're out there trawling for smelt. And I also will mention, if we have time for questions, hopefully two of our staff from the Ministry of Agriculture are on this call as well, Cohen Langerak and Terry Billman. So the LEADS project, the LEADS program, LEADS stands for Lake Erie Agriculture Demonstrating Sustainability. Each year we roll out about $2.5 million directly to farmers to take on-farm measures with respect to nutrient loss. And when it's all said and done, the farmers can cover up to 30, up to 90% of the project costs themselves. Now, many on this call and with our presentations are familiar with the time-tested measures that we've seen over many generations of, I guess what I consider responsible farming, grass waterways, of course. So I'll just run down a very quick list of the kinds of best management practices that are getting the funding. For example, grass waterways, sediment basins, other erosion control structures, cover crops, of course, to help overwinter, especially with cash crop, where all too often the land is left bare over the winter, and then you get the spring rains. Wind breaks and wind strips. Much of our area in this part of the North Shore of Lake Erie is sandy soil. I'm right in tobacco country here, and we've had very serious problems over the last 200 years, really, with the sand blowing away. Set aside of land, certainly along streams and rivers. Set aside of other environmentally fragile land, that land that shouldn't be farmed. I mean, it's okay to graze cattle on it, but or sheep, but the very steep slopes, for example, wetlands. I'm guilty myself. I farm, and I do know in the past when we get a dry spring, oftentimes you do kind of wade in with your disc and disc down the cattails in a dry area and put corn in there or soybeans. Planting trees, very significant component of this program, or it may be tall grass prairie or other types of vegetation, which we know are all to the good for wildlife. And it truly is a miracle. I've seen so many of the farms, including our own farms, where we've seen the changes in management practices. I know we put 200 acres into trees a number of years ago, and the miracle happens. The wildlife comes back, the butterflies, the ducks. It is astounding. And once farmers see that, oftentimes they don't need that government grant. They'll go ahead and continue on of their own volition to improve what they have an opportunity to farm. Another major component of the grant program, being farmer specific, is money for modifying farm equipment. For example, the problem of soil compaction. So there's money to invest in much better, wider, bigger tires, for example, or invest in technology where you can raise and lower the tire pressure depending on field conditions. And of course, assistance as far as purchasing equipment or modifying equipment for no-till or better ways of applying manure. So since the year 2018, and I guess we're a few years into this program, it's a Canada-Ontario funded program. About $10 million has gone in. There's been 710 projects. And just this January, we opened it up again, and 220 projects are approved for this coming year. Requirements for the farmers: they have to complete a farmland health checkup. It's a field-specific risk assessment. They'll sit down with a a technical specialist, a crop advisor, an agrologist, work out what they have. When's the last time you did a soil test, for example? The second component is the money part, which is up to $20,000 per farm on this cost share program once they've completed that checkup. And the third major and very important component, a program we've had for years and years in the province of Ontario, it's referred to the Environmental Farm Plan. It's been around for decades, and every farmer is required to have an up-to-date environmental farm plan as well to qualify and to be part of this program. So I've rushed through that very quickly. I just focused on one project. You can appreciate the province of Ontario, our presence on the Great Lakes. There's a plethora of so many other programs and funding opportunities through not only agriculture, but our environment and through our Ministry of Natural Resources. And this is part and parcel, as I say, the money is federal, provincial money. In total, it's referred to as the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. And there's about a $61 million fund there over 5 years. So I will stop there. I know my friend John Vantoff is waiting in the wings, and if I wasn't going to wrap this up quickly, I'd be in the bad books with Carolyn Orr, and you do not want to get in Carolyn's bad books. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, MPP Barrett. We'll hold off on questions until we hear from MPP Vanhoff, and take it away.
Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, the Great Lakes Caucus, and on this nutrient management task force for allowing me to speak. And I have learned a lot today, and I'm not going to cover the same ground as Toby. I'll just talk about a couple things that we've had in Ontario for a long time and a couple of issues that you've identified, that the previous speakers. So we've had nutrient management planning for a long time in Ontario, over 20 years. The one thing I think that we could do a better job at is, and it was mentioned in Dr. McKay's, one of his answers, is currently it really focuses on manure management, not on overall nutrient management. So as whole areas turn to cash cropping, it's not really, those nutrients aren't really cataloged or quantified or in any way. And that is a weakness in our system. I'm not here to criticize our system. I'm a farmer. But that is something where we've been doing nutrient management planning a long time, but that's something that we could do a better job at. In our area, and I'm 6 hours north of Toronto. We are, part of my riding is in the Great Lakes watershed, and part of it is in the Arctic Ocean watershed. But we are a very new agricultural area, and the rules aren't consistent across the province. So things are happening here regarding land clearing, and that wouldn't and shouldn't be allowed, quite frankly. And that is something we need to work on. I think we could learn from you, and there's some things that we could learn, that you can learn from us. But that's one thing that we tend to focus much closer to the Great Lakes. We focus very strongly, but farther away from the Great Lakes, our focus isn't as strong, and that is a considerable issue. And there was one other issue that I was our focus, and this is regardless of partisan or party. Our focus over the years with programming has improved. So it used to be that and now I'm a legislator, but the legislators and the bureaucrats would come up with an idea and thou shalt do this. So they decided in our area once that we should become much more crop oriented, so everyone could get a grant to put up grain storage and buy crop growing equipment. And everybody bought grain storage and crop growing equipment, but we were a livestock area at the time, so nobody used it. And now we focus more on quantifiable goals. And we need to do that more on environmental solutions as well. And we are doing that. We're doing a better job of that, saying, okay, so we want to reduce erosion by X or increase our the organic matter in our soil by why. What is the best way, farmer or crop association, to do that in your area? And if we can help you do that, and if you can increase it by such and such an amount, then you would qualify for funding. And I'm hoping that we continue to move in that direction, because it's much more collaborative. And in the end, what we want to see is we want to see the identifiable goal. You want to see less erosion, you want to see less phosphorus, and so does the agriculture community, because farmers don't, as a farmer, we don't buy fertilizer or spread manure to throw it away, right? That's not our goal. But sometimes we don't see the bigger picture. And if we can work collaboratively, continue to work collaboratively with government to see that bigger picture, it benefits us all. And with that, I'd like to conclude, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, MPP Van Hoff, and really thank you to all of our presenters today. This has been a really informative discussion, and we only have a little bit of time left here, but we're going to open the lines up now so we can engage in discussion or questions, and feel free to ask questions through any of the different mechanisms, whether that's raising a hand or typing it in the chat, or just unmuting yourself if there's a lull here. I do want to bring us back to the question that MPP Barrett had asked earlier, which was, outside of just Ohio, how are we doing the monitoring? And that really is one of those kind of questions, as we have state-by-state efforts, how do we make sure that we can compare apples to apples in terms of the effectiveness of different interventions, and make sure that we're getting manageable statistics where we can actually have some useful comparisons in the relative value of different policy choices. So I'll just throw that open to anybody, but certainly if anybody has any questions, we still have a few minutes for those.
Andre, maybe I should answer my own question. It was explained very well at the end by Scudder, but we have to justify what we're doing, and of course, Ontario has signed on with Ohio and Michigan for that 40% reduction in phosphorus. So we certainly have to convince those people that are putting up the money that we're having an effect. But I think most importantly, we have to continue to convince the farmers that this is working and that this is a good idea. And there are farmers, I think John Van Toff referred to this, who the government grant comes up. Many of them are very good at filling out those forms at midnight and getting the government grant. But are they really thinking about the end goal, about the health of Lake Erie? Are they worried about, the rocks that have turned green down on my part of Lake Erie? So it can't just be a government program or a government grant. So many of the programs are truly farmer driven. And once they see the miracle of their land coming back in part to the natural environment, when they see, clear water coming off their fields instead of muddy water full of phosphorus, they become the best evaluators you could ever ask for in spreading the word to other farmers.
Very good. MPP French, I see you have your hand raised. Go right ahead.
Thank you. And thank you to the Ontario presenters as well. Appreciate it. Learned something new today. But my question is sort of for Chastity and for maybe both of you, but we had a presentation last time we had a webinar, I believe, from the about the meat program in the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program. And many of the members of this task force actually had the opportunity to be on a demonstration farm, but on a farm that was a perfect demonstration of, we got to see a lot of the program in action. They had a sign there to show that this farm was a meat farm and whatnot. But as I recalled from the last webinar, they were kind of talking about how do we take that program or programs like that where a farmer or a farm is a part of this program, doing their best to be sustainable, responsible, all that stuff, And how do we put that in the local market or grocery store? How do I, as a neighbor and a consumer, you know, feed into this program by feeding my family with something that comes from one of those farms? So I thought it was interesting, Chastity, as you were talking about the certifications and whatnot. What does it look like for the, I mean, I see the certification seal, you showed it, I have a basic understanding, but is there something that says, hey, a local farm has made an environmentally responsible decision, you can support them? And, you know, because that's something that might be interesting in Ontario with all of these kind of, you know, consumers wanting to be helpful, wanting to be informed, and wanting to buy local, support, you know, their neighbors. Can anybody speak to a program that is working or what that could look like?
That's what the New York, this is Chastity. That's what the New York State Grown and Certified is. And I just put the link for the program actually in the chat. And in New York State, those products will have that seal or sticker on them. And so you look for those products that are there and that have that sticker. And what we try to do is press releases, news articles, brochures for our local public that say, hey, listen, support these producers. There's a list of them on that website. And buy local when you can. And by going to that website, you can see all the practices they have to go through and the steps they have to go through in order to get that seal. They don't just get them because they're a New York State producer. You have to apply and go through the process and make sure that you're getting everything implemented. And so buying local, and this is across everywhere, buy local, look for your local people, be educated, and try and get that information out. That's the hiccup, is getting that information out and getting people to know to look for that sticker. Yeah. In New York State, it's 36 on the milk. Buy the milk that says 36 in the beginning of the, there's a little stamp on a jug of milk. And if this 30 starts with a 36 dash, that's New York State milk. And so we try to promote that too.
I might buy Ontario milk if that's okay, but just.
That's okay. You can do what you need to.
But I take your point. Yeah.
Yep.
We all know that the happiest cows are from Wisconsin.
Oh,
Next,
careful,
we will turn.
Careful. The happiest American cows.
My role here on the
happiest American cows.
Next, we'll go to Mary Lightbody.
Good morning. Thank you. Or I guess it's maybe afternoon now. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm a representative in Ohio, in the central Ohio area, but I'm the widow of a environmental engineer who did water resources engineering. So I've been following what's going on with Lake Erie and the water bodies of water in the state and in Ontario as well. The question I have is that the last time I had a conversation with members of the Ohio Farm Bureau about nutrient loading in Lake Erie, they were concerned that a large portion of the nutrients getting into Lake Erie came from the lawn service companies that would go in the neighborhoods and, you know, try to create monocultures in the lawns and add fertilizers, and that sometimes they didn't pay too much attention to when they were there. The rain would come the day they'd just been there, and it would run right off into the watershed and then thus into Lake Erie. Is there any attempt to address that particular concern? They were saying that there's a limit to the number of acres that they would apply those fertilizers to, and that they claim that they fall under that limit, and so they don't. Their activities are not controlled. I'm just wondering if that's been addressed at all. And I apologize if you mentioned this and I missed it.
Yeah, this is Scudder Mackey. You know, with respect to that, the relative contributions, and I don't have the numbers right up at the tip of my fingers here, but the contributions from the types of applications you're talking about are a relatively small percentage of the total load that is introduced into our waterways. And if I recall, at least I think Scott's in particular, is that for those lawn fertilizers, is that the phosphorus has been pretty much eliminated from at least their fertilizers. In fact, I was just looking at some lawn fertilizer a couple of days ago, and there's some nitrogen there and there's some potassium, but there's a zero where the phosphorus is. So, I think there's certainly some things that we can do from an outreach and education side in terms of limiting that application and educating the public, because, you have the professional lawn service providers, and I think that that's something that we can certainly work with. But a lot of the application is by private homeowners who go out and buy 3 or 4 bags of fertilizer, and they either over apply it or apply it incorrectly on their own personal properties. So I think there's probably more that we can do there, and certainly I can discuss this internally with our agencies.
Good, I appreciate that, because I was concerned that they were sort of trying to pass the buck a little bit and say, well, it's
Yes.
not us, it's them. And I didn't think they could possibly have the impact that the farmers were telling me. So thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, that's fine. I've worked very closely with Larry Antosh with the Ohio Farm Bureau, and we have some very good discussions about some of these issues. And one of the things I will share with you is that, I think that in the agricultural community, they have done a lot to limit and control and manage the fertilizer. As I said, we're really moving forward with their H2 Ohio program and the number of acres that we're touching. And that's a good thing, but there's another side of this coin, and that's how water moves across the landscape and how quickly water moves off the landscape. Mm-hmm. And that's the vehicle by which the soils and the fertilizer actually gets into our tributaries and then into Lake Erie. And I think we are starting to look internally at ways, how can we do a better job at water management on the landscape? How can we slow the flow? That's in part what some of the wetlands do. They retain water, but there may be other options as well. And I think several were mentioned by some of the other speakers. So I'll just leave it at that. But we are working and cooperating with the Ohio Farm Bureau very closely.
Thank you, Dr. Mackey, Representative Lightbody. And last, I think we'll go to Senator John Bison of Michigan, and then we'll proceed to a wrap up just out of respect for everybody's time.
Thank you very much for going into overtime and allowing me to simply ask a question of how are we doing with nutrients in Lake Erie?
Progress report by any of our speakers.
Well, the one thing I could say is that last year it was probably one of the lower, let's say, harmful algal bloom events in terms of the nutrients. I know in the Sandusky Bay area that we had virtually no harmful algal blooms in Sandusky Bay. It was an unusual year. I think a lot of it had to do with, in part, the timing and the amount of discharge. And I think that some of our practices are just starting to take effect. Understand in our H2 Ohio program in Ohio that this program started in basically the spring of 2019. It takes time to get things ramped up, and in fact, our wetland projects, a number of them have been completed, but many are still under construction, and it's going to take a year or two before we start really seeing the impact of the investments that we're making right now. So I would say at this point, I think we're starting to make some headway. But in many cases, I think the natural conditions, the precipitation, the temperature changes, the weather is also going to be a driving factor that may actually, at least for the short term, really drive what's happening on Lake Erie.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. I think if we can move on to the next slide. Just want to remind everybody not to forget to register for the next webinar, May 21st, when we'll be taking a close look at the Blue Accounting Program, do a little bit of a test drive on the new website. And that's, of course, the Great Lakes Commission. It's a web-based program to track the effectiveness of all of our efforts. Just a reminder that the recording of this webinar, as well as the slide sets, are all going to be available relatively quickly here on the the caucus website. And let's see, looks like later today, so we'll get them right out to everybody. For those of you stateside, just a reminder that obviously there's a substantial amount of money in the ARPA federal dollars that have been passed down, and we know that water infrastructure is eligible for those funds, so that's a great opportunity in our state efforts to address things like lead pipe replacement and green infrastructure, and some of the things that we're talking about in regards to non-point source and other water infrastructure efforts. And then in closing, I just want to thank our sponsors, the Joyce Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation. We greatly appreciate the support that we have continued to receive from these three foundations and their recognition that state and provincial legislators are vital stakeholders to engage in the policymaking process in the Great Lakes region. Just want to thank you again for joining us today. We've had excellent participation, and everybody make it a great day.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.